So I want you to imagine a world where every single sentence you speak isn't just conveying basic information, right?
Right.
But it's actively arranging your social status. Like every time you open your mouth, you are signaling your education.
Oh, absolutely.
You're mapping out exactly where you stand in a hierarchy, and you're carefully curating this emotional distance from the person you're talking to.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds exhausting, right?
Totally.
Like you're constantly on stage under a spotlight or something.
Well, you aren't just communicating in that scenario, You're performing a highly structured social chess match.
Wow, yeah, a chess match.
Exactly. And the rules are entirely invisible to outsiders. But for those inside the language, every verb tense, every pronoun choice, and every tiny pause is a calculated move.
Just to assert dominance or something.
Right. Either to assert dominance or show deference or just maintain a very specific boundary.
That is wild. Well, welcome to this custom-tailored deep dive. Today, we are tearing into a really fascinating stack of cultural, historical, and linguistic notes to completely deconstruct the French language.
It's a great stack of sources today.
It really is. We have historical records, sociolinguistic breakdowns, and some truly brilliant cultural analysis. But here's the critical thing for you listening. We are absolutely not looking at this as a grammar lesson.
No, definitely not.
There are no pop quizzes today. We are dissecting French as a brilliant, centuries-old piece of social architecture.
Yeah, because the sources we're examining, they treat language not just as a neutral tool, right? It's not just for pointing at things in the physical world.
Right.
It's a mechanism for organizing human attention.
I love that phrase, organizing human attention.
Yeah, it's a way of establishing authority, policing boundaries, and literally turning raw thought into cultivated style.
So what does this all mean? When people talk about French, they usually default to these very, dusty, soft-focused tourist cliches.
Oh, for sure. The berets and baguettes.
Exactly. They call it the language of love, or they say it's just inherently romantic and beautiful.
Right.
But the sources reveal a reality with much sharper edges. French is, fundamentally, a language of power.
It really is.
It's a language of prestige, of high-stakes argument, and of incredibly dense social texture.
I mean, historically, it functioned as the definitive language of diplomacy, right?
Yeah.
The language of courts and aristocratic salons. And it carries that specific DNA in its very structure today.
So it's built for a certain kind of person.
Yeah, exactly. It's a language built for a specific kind of personality. The notes call it sort of a Liz-coded personality, someone who operates with pure charisma,
Right.
high status orientation, and an effortless sort of social dominance. It rewards those who can navigate complex social codes without, breaking a sweat.
Right, without breaking a sweat. So to figure out how a language actually stages reality like that and how it forces you to think about hierarchy before you even, pick a verb,
Yeah.
we have to go back to how it was built. Because French wasn't born prestigious.
No, not at all.
It didn't just fall out of the sky sounding like a perfectly tailored suit. It had to be aggressively engineered.
Right. And to understand that engineering, we really have to look at the raw materials.
Okay, take us back.
So if we go back to the Roman Empire, when Rome absorbed the region of Gaul, the local Celtic languages, which were known as Gaulish, they didn't just vanish overnight.
Right, they stuck around.
They did. But the Romans brought Vulgar Latin.
And Vulgar Latin is...
Well, this wasn't the elevated poetic Latin of Cicero or Virgil that you'd study in a textbook.
Oh, okay.
Vulgar Latin was the everyday, gritty, spoken language of the Roman soldiers,
The street slang?
Exactly. The soldiers, the merchants, the local administrators. Over generations, this street-level Latin became the dominant language of urban life and trade in the region.
I think that's such a crucial distinction. Vulgar Latin wasn't bad Latin.
Right.
It was just living, breathing Latin, doing the actual work of society, as opposed to the stuffy written stuff locked away in scrolls.
Yeah, and that living language started to mutate, right, because of the linguistic environment it was planted in.
The Celtic influence.
Exactly. You had the older Celtic Gaulish substrate, which left permanent traces in local place names.
Oh, interesting.
And it introduced certain sound habits, particularly how speakers physically moved their mouths to produce vowels.
Okay, so it starts changing the physical sounds.
Right. And then, after the Roman Empire's authority collapsed, a completely new layer was added by the Franks.
So the Germanic Franks sweep in,
Yep.
and they don't just conquer the territory, they leave a massive imprint on how the language sounds and what it actually cares about.
Exactly. The Germanic Frankish language heavily influenced pronunciation and naming conventions.
Okay.
But more importantly, it brought in a highly specific vocabulary. The words that entered the language from Frankish were overwhelmingly tied to war, social status, and governance.
War and status, that tracks.
Right. And hovering above this entire messy, violent collision of Celtic, Latin, and Germanic sounds was Church Latin.
Right, the church.
The Catholic Church preserved a classical, highly regulated written model of prestige. So early French developed in a state of constant tension.
Like an inferiority complex.
Totally. It was haunted by this idea that serious, elevated intellectual thought belonged strictly to Latin.
It essentially had an inferiority complex from day one. It was the language of the dirt and the soldiers, looking up at the language of God and the scholars.
That's a great way to put it.
But it's not just that French evolved from this melting pot, right?
Yeah.
It's that the specific version of French we think of today had to violently defeat its neighbors.
Yeah, absolutely.
The sources dive deep into this massive North versus South divide in what we now call France.
Right. The linguistic map of medieval France was essentially split into two massive families.
Okay, break that down for us.
So in the north, you had the Languedoc.
The Languedoc.
Yeah. This is the language family that Standard French eventually emerged from. Okay.
And in the south, you had the Languedoc, which included languages like Occitan.
Oh, Occitan.
Yeah, and Occitan wasn't some primitive dialect. I mean, it had its own incredibly rich, sophisticated literary and cultural history.
Right, the sources mention that.
It was the language of the troubadours,
Yeah.
famous across all of Europe for their complex poetry and courtly love songs.
Wait, okay. If the southern language had the poets and the rich cultural prestige across Europe, why did the northern version win?
That is the million-dollar question.
Like, was Standard French just inherently better at expressing complex thoughts? Did it have a more logical grammar system?
No, not at all. It won purely through political struggle, geography, and proximity to military power.
Wow, pure politics.
Pure politics. Standard French is not the natural language of France in any biological or linguistic sense.
Really?
Yeah. It is simply the dialect that happened to have the biggest army and the most aggressive political machinery backing it up.
The biggest army and the best PR team. Exactly. The Capetian monarchy, which was based in and around Paris, gradually and methodically expanded its political control over the centuries.
So because the kings were in Paris.
Right. Because the royal court, the administration, and the entire bureaucracy of the expanding kingdom ran through Paris, the specific dialect of the Parisian region gained all the institutional power.
It's the ultimate location success story.
It really is.
If those early kings had happened to set up their primary capital in the south, near the Mediterranean, we'd probably all be talking about how Occitan is the most elegant philosophical language on earth.
Oh, without a doubt.
But the kings were in Paris, and then the sources point to a very specific historical moment that changes the game entirely.
Right. 1539.
1539. King Francois I issues the Ordinance of Villers-Cotterêts. Did I say that right?
Yeah, Villers-Cotterêts. And this single legal ordinance declared that French, rather than Latin, would be the exclusive language of all legal and administrative documents in the kingdom.
That is a staggering power grab.
It is huge.
They essentially outlawed the language of God in favor of the language of the king.
Exactly.
But what did that actually mean for the average person? Like, if I'm a peasant living in the South speaking Occitan, and suddenly the laws governing my land and my life are written in a northern dialect, I barely understand what happens to me.
You are immediately disenfranchised.
Just locked out.
Completely. It wasn't merely a practical decision by the king to make things easier for his scribes, It was a massive centralization of authority.
He was flexed.
A total flex. It declared that Standard French was finally fit for law, fit for power, and fit for defining official reality.
Wow.
It explicitly told the church and the Latin scholars that the state no longer needed their language to rule.
Well, that's a huge shift.
And for the regional citizen, it meant that your local language was now legally irrelevant. To have access to justice, to property rights, to the state itself, you had to operate in the king's French.
So French officially enters the chat as the language of statehood. But the monarchy didn't just decree the use of French and walk away, right?
Oh.
They became intensely, almost pathologically obsessive about how it was used. Which brings us to the creation of the Académie Française in 1635.
Yeah, the Académie Française is arguably one of the most remarkable and unusual institutions in global linguistic history.
How so?
Well, Many languages have dictionaries and traditions of telling people how to speak properly, right?
Like style guides.
Right. But the Academy elevated linguistic regulation into a highly visible performance.
The sources refer to it as cultural theater, I think.
Yes, cultural theater. French became unusually self-conscious about correctness, purity, and elegance. The language was treated as a monument that needed constant guarding.
Like they created a VIP club for words.
That's exactly what it was.
You're in, you're elegant enough for the court, you're out, you're peasant slang. They turned grammar into a bouncer at a nightclub.
I love that analogy.
And this centralization just kept snowballing right into the Bourbon dynasty. Speaking well wasn't just about sounding pleasant. It was about strict social positioning.
Right. It was your rank made audible.
Your rank made audible. That is so intense.
And during the 17th to the 19th centuries, this obsessive cultivation paid off on a global scale.
Because it spread.
Yeah, French began its absolute reign as the premier language of diplomacy.
Oh,
If you were a Russian aristocrat, an English diplomat, or a Prussian noble drafting a treaty or writing elite correspondence, you did it in French.
even if you weren't French.
Exactly. The language gained this impenetrable aura of absolute clarity, polish, and civilization. The reputation of the language began to wield almost as much power as the military backing it.
Okay, but here is where history throws a massive curveball.
Yeah, it really does.
The French Revolution happens. The peasants and the bourgeoisie rise up, they chop off the king's head, and the entire society is suddenly supposed to be built on liberty, equality, fraternity.
Right, power to the people.
Right. So you would logically think the revolutionaries would say, let 1,000 dialects bloom. The king's strict grammar is dead. Speak however you want.
You would think so, but the irony is profound.
What actually happened?
The French Revolution actually accelerated the violent centralization of the language.
Wait, really? Why?
Because the revolutionaries viewed regional languages, local dialects, and patois not as expressions of liberty, but as dangerous obstacles to national unity.
Oh, I see.
They believed that to have a unified, unbreakable republic, you needed a single, unified language to bind the minds of the citizens together.
So standard French went from being the exclusive language of the aristocratic court to being the mandatory badge of citizenship.
Exactly. Standard French became the ultimate test of modern statehood.
So to be considered a loyal, good citizen of the new republic, you had to speak the exact language of the king you just executed.
It reveals the defining paradox of French history. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's a language born from popular, vulgar, street-level Latin, but it climbed to the apex of power by becoming the ultimate gatekeeper.
Wow.
It standardized itself by aggressively suppressing regional identities, systematically erasing other ways of speaking, all in the name of building the state.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second, because I want you listening to really think about your own perception of what proper language is,
Yeah, it's a great exercise.
whether it's English or whatever your native language happens to be. We are conditioned to assume that the standard version found in a textbook is somehow logically superior.
Right, like it's cleaner or more capable of complex thought.
Exactly. But this history shatters that illusion. Your grammar book is basically just a historical ledger of who won the wars, who controlled the capital city, and who had the power to print the dictionaries.
The grammar book is quite literally a political document.
That is wild. Okay, so if a language spends centuries obsessed with power, hierarchy, and top-down correctness, that anxiety doesn't just evaporate, does it?
No, it seeps right into the foundation.
It bleeds directly into the mechanics of the language itself. The grammar becomes a machine that forces you to participate in this highly organized social hierarchy.
Yeah, the sources make a compelling, detailed argument that French grammar actively nudges your cognitive attention toward form, stance, relation, and presentation.
You can't just speak.
Right, you cannot simply output information. You must carefully construct it.
Let's look at the most obvious immediate barrier, the writing system, the spelling.
Oh, it's spelling.
Anyone who has ever tried to learn French knows the spelling feels unnecessarily brutal.
It is notoriously difficult.
There are silent letters everywhere. You've got accents, the A, the say, the circumflex on the A. I mean, the word for water is E-A-U, but you just pronounce it,
Just a single vowel sound.
It feels like the language is actively trying to trick you. But the notes say this isn't just to torture middle school students.
No, it's intentional.
It's an intentional, deeply historical design.
Yeah. French uses the Latin alphabet, but its spelling system is designed to preserve historical lineage far more than it attempts to mirror casual modern speech.
It's looking backward.
Always. Those silent final consonants, those highly specific accent marks, they serve as visual markers showing where words originated, how they relate to Latin roots, and what level of social formality they belong to.
The notes have this brilliant line to describe it. They say, French orthography is aristocratic. It dresses for dinner.
I think that analogy perfectly captures the psychological weight embedded in the writing system.
Dresses for dinner.
So good. Think about a highly phonetic language, like Spanish or certain forms of simplified English, where you largely write exactly what you hear.
Right. It's very one-to-one.
It feels accessible, democratic, and transparent. But French spelling feels intentionally official.
It feels inherited.
Yes. It reinforces a very sharp, policed cultural split between the fast, loose, messy reality of daily spoken life and the polished, disciplinary, high-stakes world of written form.
So if I'm writing an email in French, and I'm stressing over whether to add a silent E or an S to the end of an adjective.
Which you have to do.
Right. I'm not just trying to pass a spelling test. I'm literally hitting my head against a centuries-old class barrier.
Historically, without question.
Wow.
In French culture, correct mastery of written orthography has long been intrinsically tied to education access, class mobility, and intellectual seriousness.
Oh, it's another gatekeeper.
It acts as an institutional gatekeeper.
Okay.
When you spell flawlessly in French, you aren't merely ensuring your message is understood, you are proving your social legitimacy.
You're showing your badge.
You are signaling that you belong to the educated class.
Okay, so the spelling is wearing a tuxedo and checking my credentials at the door.
Yeah.
What about the sentences themselves?
That's where it gets even more architectural.
The sources mention that French is a subject-verb-object language, just like English. You say, I see Marie, je vois Marie.
Right.
That seems pretty straightforward on the surface, doesn't it?
At a purely skeletal level, yeah, the word order aligns with English, but the complexity lies in how French relies heavily on what linguists call clitic pronouns.
Clitic pronouns.
Yeah, these are tiny, specialized pronouns that must slot into incredibly precise, inflexible positions within the verb phrase.
Give me an example.
So if you want to say something like, I give it to him in English, you just casually stack the words at the end of the sentence.
Yeah, it's easy. I give it to him.
But in French, you must say, je le lui donne.
Je le lui donne.
Literally translated, that is, I it to him give.
Oh, wow.
The pronouns are embedded directly into the structural core of the sentence, wrapping around the verb.
It's like having a highly specific blueprint where every single Lego piece must snap into its exact designated groove before you can even hand the structure to the other person.
That's a great visual.
The notes point out that French sentences feel architected. In English, we just pile nouns together. I can say the weird little red book. It's just a stack of descriptors.
We love noun stacking in English.
We really do. But French requires you to use prepositions, relative clauses, and articles to build a rigid frame before you can deliver the actual meaning.
Let's focus on those articles for a moment, actually, because they are deeply revealing.
Okay, the S and AS.
Right. English is incredibly flexible and often perfectly happy with bare, unmodified nouns. We can make grand, sweeping statements like, I love bread, or liberty is important, or time flies.
Yeah, no articles needed.
But French strongly prefers, and in most cases strictly requires, the definite article.
So you can't just say bread.
No. You say, j'aime le pain, la liberté, le temps.
Why does that matter? What does forcing a speaker to add the to abstract concepts actually do to their brain?
The sources suggest that by constantly requiring articles, French grammar packages the world as something that is already categorized, defined, and framed.
Oh, I see.
You are not allowed to just vaguely point at the abstract ether of liberty. You are required to point at the specific, defined, bounded concept of la liberté.
It makes every sentence feel like a small, highly coordinated social order.
Exactly. And this exact sense of mandatory coordination is massively amplified by the gender system.
Oh boy. The dreaded grammatical gender.
It's a big one.
Every noun is either masculine or feminine, which always tricks up English speakers because obviously a table isn't biologically female and a book isn't biologically male.
Right. Grammatical gender has nothing to do with biological sex. It is a system of noun class.
Right, a category.
But what it does accomplish cognitively is that it forces the language to constantly classify and agree with itself.
Like matching outfits.
Literally. If the foundational noun of your sentence is feminine, the article must instantly shift to feminine.
Okay.
Any adjective attached to it must take on a feminine ending.
It has to match.
In certain complex past tenses, even the verb's past participle must physically change its spelling to acknowledge that feminine noun.
Wait, The verb changes spelling just because the noun is feminine.
Yes. The words in a French sentence cannot exist in isolation. They must constantly acknowledge one another's presence and status.
So if I'm speaking English, I can just throw words out into the air and they don't really care about each other.
They're very independent in English.
They just sit there. But in French, every single word is looking around the room, making sure its outfit coordinates perfectly with everyone else's outfit.
Yeah.
It is a highly regulated dinner party where everyone has an assigned seat.
That visual captures the mechanical reality perfectly.
And the most intense, psychologically demanding social regulation happens not with nouns, but with the pronouns used to address other human beings.
No, absolutely. The famous distinction between tu and vous.
This is the ultimate social calculus. In English, I just use the word you.
Right. It's so easy.
It's a great democratic equalizer.
Yeah.
I say you to my dog when he steals a shoe. I say you to my childhood best friend. And I would say you if I were introduced to the president.
Yeah. English doesn't make you choose.
But in French, the language splits. You have tu for singular informal address and vous for plural or formal address.
And the psychological impact of this cannot be overstated.
Really?
Consider what happens to your daily mental state when you are forced by the fundamental laws of your grammar to make that specific choice every single time you address another human being.
You would be constantly scanning the power dynamics of every room you enter.
Precisely. You cannot just talk to someone in French. You must place them.
You have to place them.
You have to actively, consciously assess the degree of intimacy, the age difference, the level of professional authority, and the unspoken social permission before you even open your mouth to say hello.
That is so stressful.
The grammar actively trains your attention toward the social boundary itself.
I am just imagining the sheer anxiety of being at a work party in Paris.
Oh, yeah, the holiday party scenario.
Right. You've been calling your boss vous for 3 solid years. You're at a party. You both had 3 glasses of wine. The vibe is relaxed. Do you switch to tu?
It's a huge risk.
If you boldly make the switch and they don't immediately do it back, you haven't just made a slight mistake. You've committed a massive social faux pas.
Yeah, you've aggressively crossed an invisible line of respect.
And conversely, if you stubbornly maintain the formal vous when the social context dictates that you should have relaxed into tu,
You run the risk of seeming incredibly cold, painfully distant, or overly rigid.
English completely allows you to sidestep this choice.
Totally. French makes it structural. It encodes social hierarchy and emotional proximity directly into the foundational grammar.
It's like the language itself is a bouncer, checking IDs at the door of intimacy.
Exactly.
And speaking of boundaries and rules, the sources dive into the concept of negation, how you formulate a negative thought,
The ne ne pas.
right? The classic written French uses a 2-part structure forming a bracket around the verb ne me pas, je ne sais pas, I do not know.
The ne pas structure is fascinating because classical written French loves to enclose thought in these balanced, symmetrical, logical boxes.
That's very neat.
It is an exercise in rhetorical control. You open the negation, state the verb, and close the negation.
Okay, but what does casual spoken French actually do in reality?
It routinely drops the ne entirely. People just say, je sais pas.
Wait, let me make sure I'm grasping the weight of this. If I drop the ne in spoken French, I'm not just saving a tiny millisecond of breath, right?
No, not at all.
No, I'm completely changing my social outfit. Like I'm taking off the tuxedo and throwing on sweatpants.
Yes, that's exactly what you're doing.
Wow.
The linguistic gap between formal written French and casual spoken French is immense, much wider than in English.
So it's a huge leap.
A massive leap. Moving fluidly between those registers is itself a critical, highly judged social skill.
So if I get it wrong.
If you use full classical 2-part negation while hanging out in a casual bar with friends, you sound incredibly stiff, pedantic, and out of touch.
Like a textbook.
Exactly. But if, however, you drop the no while delivering a formal presentation or writing a diplomatic essay, you signal a lack of education and a failure to respect the gravity of the setting.
So the language relentlessly forces you to read the room.
Always.
You have to know exactly what level of the social hierarchy you are operating in at all times
Yeah,
and dress your grammar accordingly.
precisely.
If the grammar is constantly forcing you to calculate your social standing and curate your emotional distance, does that intense anxiety and awareness bleed into the actual vocabulary?
It shapes it entirely.
Like, are there concepts that only exist because of this cultural pressure?
Absolutely. The sources outline a set of concepts demonstrating exactly how French vocabulary stages reality.
Ooh, I love untranslatable words.
These are words that English speakers attempt to translate approximately, but the English equivalents completely fail to capture their full cultural weight and emotional force.
Let's start with my absolute favorite one of the notes, because it sounds so simple on the surface, but it's apparently this massive, heavy concept, terroir.
Terroir.
Yes, usually in English, if we are at a wine tasting, we just translate this to soil or maybe local character.
And translating terroir simply as dirt or soil misses the entire philosophical foundation of the word.
Why? What is it, really?
Terroir represents the specific taste, character, and soul of a place as it is shaped by a complex intersection of factors.
Okay, like what?
The physical land, the microclimate, the centuries of historical traditions, and the deeply ingrained human craft involved in cultivating it.
So it's not just the dirt.
Not at all. It reveals an entire cultural worldview that intimately links human identity to a specific region. It means the history of a place is literally something you can consume and taste.
So you aren't just drinking a glass of fermented grape juice.
No.
You are drinking the exact rainfall of 1998, the mineral composition of a specific hillside, and the inherited sweat of a fifth-generation farmer.
That's exactly it.
The geographical poetry.
Okay.
Okay, here's another one that seems incredibly difficult to pin down: esprit.
Esprit, that's a great one.
English translates it as spirit or mind, but the notes make it clear that it falls totally flat.
It falls flat because mind implies solitary, quiet intelligence, you know?
Like studying in a room.
Right. Esprit carries a heavy weight of liveliness, style, verbal quickness, and social sparkle.
Social sparkle.
It's not about being smart in a bookish, isolated way, studying alone in a library. It's about having an intellect that dances brilliantly in a social setting. It requires an audience.
It's that pure, effortless charisma we talked about earlier.
Yes.
It's wit deployed as a social weapon. And that ties right into another famous phrase, joie de vivre.
A classic.
We say joy of living in English, but again, we're missing the target.
We really are. In French, joie de vivre does not mean a random, spontaneous burst of generic happiness.
It's not just smiling.
No, it implies a practiced, cultivated pleasure in existence.
Practiced, that's key.
Highly social, deeply sensual, and fundamentally aesthetic. It's the acquired ability to extract deliberate aesthetic pleasure from the rhythms of daily life.
Like what kind of rhythm?
From the perfect pacing of a good meal, a long, meandering conversation, or the specific atmosphere of a beautiful evening.
I want to ask you, listening, have you ever thought about how having a specific vocabulary word for practiced delight in living might literally change how you experience a random Friday night out?
It totally changes the lens.
Because if you're an English speaker, you might just say, I'm having a good time hanging out.
Right.
But if you possess the concept of joie de vivre, you are actively participating in an ancient cultural tradition of appreciating life.
Yeah.
You are staging the enjoyment. You are aware of yourself enjoying it.
What's fascinating here is it shows how French shapes not just the raw transmission of thought, but the specific modulation of emotional expression.
Modulation.
Yeah, French culture does not generally favor raw, blunt blurting of feelings. It favors modulation, precision, and aesthetic framing.
Which brings us to a very specific urban vibe, the flaneur.
Ah, the flaneur. To flaneur is to stroll, but it is walking with alert idleness.
Alert idleness.
The flaneur is the iconic figure of the urban observer who wanders, watches, and absorbs the complex theater of the city.
So it's not power walking?
No, it transforms mere walking a functional way to get from point A to point B into an entire philosophy of urban consciousness and aesthetic observation.
So you aren't just running errands to pick up milk.
Exactly.
You are actively absorbing the tragic comedy of the human condition on the streets of Paris.
That's the vibe.
It's incredibly dramatic, and I love that a word exists for it. But not all these words are about pleasure or observation, right?
Yeah.
Some are born out of pure, brutal, historical conflict. Like liete.
Liete is typically translated in the American press as secularism, but that is a dangerous undertranslation.
It doesn't capture it.
Not even close. It refers to a fiercely specific French model of public neutrality. You have to understand how this word was forged.
Okay, tell us.
It wasn't a polite philosophical agreement. It was born through centuries of brutal, bloody conflict with the overwhelming political and social power of the Catholic Church.
So it's a defensive word.
Very much so. It's not merely the American concept of separation of church and state, which is essentially designed to protect religion from the government.
Right.
Laicite is designed to protect the public sphere from the influence of religion. The history of anti-clerical struggle is baked permanently into the noun.
The word itself contains the scars of a revolution.
It does.
On a completely different emotional spectrum, we have the vocabulary of human connection. Retrouver.
Such a beautiful word. The profound joy of seeing someone again after a long, painful separation.
And we don't have that in English.
English requires an entire clunky, multi-word sentence to explain that specific emotional state. French gives it a single, elegant, dedicated noun.
But out of all these incredible, untranslatable concepts, the one that absolutely blew my mind the most is l'esprit d'escalier.
Oh, staircase wit.
Literally translated as staircase wit. What exactly does this mean?
It describes the agonizing experience of thinking of the absolute perfect, devastating comeback to an insult.
But too late.
But only after you have already left the party, the argument is over, and you are literally walking down the stairs to go home.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me. It is the universal, deeply human experience of winning an argument in the shower 2 days later.
Exactly. We all do it.
Everyone on Earth experiences this frustration. But I marvel at the fact that French culture takes conversational performance so incredibly seriously and judges verbal sparring so harshly that they gave failure a beautifully specific, poetic name.
It reveals a culture where conversation is viewed as a high-stakes, real-time performance.
Love to be quick.
In French, you are socially expected to think clearly, phrase your thoughts beautifully, and respond cleverly in the exact moment.
And if you don't?
If you fail to do so, the language itself mocks you with l'esprit d'escalier. It perfectly illustrates how French prioritizes social texture.
Social texture.
The sources point out that French is globally exceptional at expressing micro-nuances of stance, politeness, hesitation, irony, admiration, and contempt.
Yes. The notes explicitly say, you can insult with silk gloves.
Because French grammar forces you to constantly navigate register, tone, and hierarchy, you can effortlessly weaponize those elements.
We don't need to yell.
You don't have to raise your voice or use profanity to insult someone at all. You can utterly diminish them simply by shifting your phrasing, by deploying mock formality, or by utilizing an absolute, perfectly calibrated dryness.
Whereas in English,
Especially modern American English, highly values momentum, speed, and flat, functional directness. French values the rhetorical staging and aesthetic delivery of an idea.
I want to frame this as a shared realization for all of us listening. Have you ever had a feeling, a deep anxiety, or a sudden burst of joy that you just couldn't articulate because English didn't have the word for it?
It happens all the time.
By naming something like staircase wit, French elevates it from a private, isolated frustration into a shared, acknowledged cultural pillar.
It validates the experience.
And this precise atmospheric vocabulary doesn't just live invisibly inside people's minds. It spills out tangibly into the physical world. It dictates how people interact with their environment.
Right, because language shapes culture, and the physical practices of a culture reshape the language right back.
It's a feedback loop.
Nowhere is this feedback loop more evident or deeply studied in French than in the vocabulary of food.
Oh, French food language is legendary worldwide. But the notes argue it's not just about things tasting delicious.
No, it's about classification.
The language turns the act of eating into a rigid system of classification, historical memory, and national pride. You have words like appellation, gastronomy, mise en place.
French culinary language serves as a living environmental history.
How so?
It remembers the grain-growing regions, the specific vineyard cultures, the ancient coastal fishing traditions, and it elevates all of that local knowledge into a codified national system.
So it's organized.
Highly organized. When a chef uses a term like mise en place, the meticulous, almost meditative gathering, chopping, and organizing of all ingredients before the actual cooking begins, they aren't just talking about prep work.
It sounds like a ritual.
It is. They're applying a high-level philosophy of technique, order, and refinement to base human appetite.
It gives you profound cultural permission to take your appetite incredibly seriously.
Absolutely.
In America, Food is so often treated as mere fuel. I need to grab a bite, or I'm going to fuel up. It's mechanical.
Right, it's just calories.
In France, food is a philosophical discourse. And this intense obsession with form, flow, and order extends directly into how they process sound and
Or
music.
phonetics, yeah.
The phonetic reality of French is completely alien to English.
Well, English is what linguists call a stress-timed language.
What does that mean?
It relies on heavy percussive accents on specific syllables to create rhythm. It has an inherent drum beat.
Okay, so it punches.
Right. French, however, is syllable-timed. The syllables arrive with a much more even measured weight.
No drum beat.
Furthermore, the language utilizes deep nasal vowels, softened consonant endings, and the critical mechanic of liaison.
Liaison, right.
That's where a normally silent consonant at the end of a word suddenly sounds out to bridge the gap because the next word starts with a vowel.
It glides.
Yes.
The words physically bleed into one another.
The words literally connect, softening the harsh edges of speech. It produces a highly controlled legato flow.
And how does that phonetic reality shape the actual music the culture produces?
It naturally favors musical genres that rely on intimate, flowing, melodic vocal delivery.
Like classic French pop.
Think of the classic French chanson or the smoky cabaret style of Edith Piaf. The language suits a murmured, theatrical, seductive performance perfectly because it lacks that heavy, aggressive, percussive English stomp.
Wait, I'm struggling with this. If French is inherently smooth, gliding, and legato, how on earth does French rap work?
That is a brilliant question.
Because France is one of the largest hip-hop markets in the world. Rap traditionally relies on heavy percussion, sharp stops, and aggressive rhythmic punching. Does the French language just constantly fight the beat?
That tension is exactly where French hip-hop becomes brilliant. French rap doesn't try to mimic the percussive stomp of American rap. It weaves dense, urban slang through internal glide.
Oh, so it uses the glide.
It uses the language's inherent fluidity to create incredibly complex, fast-flowing, breathless internal rhyme schemes.
That sounds amazing.
And it sharpens that glide by incorporating hard urban rhythms and immense linguistic contact with Arabic and African languages from the banlieues, the suburbs.
So it's a mix.
It doesn't punch the beat, it weaves through it like water through a grate. As the sources note, French can be velvet or it can be a blade.
A blade. Which brings us perfectly back to humor and the mechanics of the French insult.
Oh, yes. The French insult.
English insults are like boxing. You just try to punch the other person as hard as you can with the most blunt, offensive words available.
Like a sledgehammer.
Exactly. But French insults are like judo. You don't exert massive, loud force. You just step out of the way, use a tiny phrase of mock formality or a well-placed sigh of benvoyance, a dismissive, oh, come on. And you let the other person's lack of refinement pull them down to the mat.
You can utterly humiliate someone simply by making them appear socially clumsy, overly eager, or tiresome.
Without even trying.
It's a language where conflict and aggression can be entirely beautifully stylized.
A language this potent, this engineered, and this weaponized couldn't stay contained within the borders of Europe.
Definitely not.
It spilled outward, riding the waves of history, and became a global language. But when it left Paris, it fractured. It developed a massive global paradox.
The fundamental question is, what happens when a language built on centralized, aristocratic prestige and strict Parisian gatekeeping becomes an instrument of global colonial expansion?
It gets incredibly complicated very fast.
It does.
French spread through colonialism, religious missions, diplomacy, and elite schooling to North America, the Caribbean, across the African continent, and into the Pacific.
All over the world.
And out there in the world, it didn't stay the King's French. It mutated into these incredibly diverse, vibrant, wildly different dialects.
Let's look at Quebec French in North America, for example.
Okay, let's talk about Quebec.
Historically, some outsiders, applying that strict Parisian prestige ideology, mocked Quebec French as being less pure or somehow corrupted.
Right, like it was a bad version.
But linguistically, that is absolute nonsense. Quebec French actually preserves many older traits, pronunciations, and vocabulary of the language from the 17th century that Paris itself abandoned.
So it's actually closer to the original in some ways.
In many ways, yes. At the same time, it innovated its own highly expressive vocabulary and developed a completely unique, heavily Catholic-themed swearing system.
It's totally its own thing.
It has immense historical continuity and immense literary force.
And then you have Urban African French, which the notes describe as the most dynamic engine of the language today.
Across many African nations, French serves as a critical bridge language, a lingua franca. across hundreds of distinct local languages.
Because there are so many languages spoken there.
Right. And this intense linguistic contact creates rapid, unstoppable innovation. The youth culture in massive cities like Dakar or Abidjan remixes standard French with local languages, creating entirely new slang, new syncopated rhythms, and dynamic code switching.
So it's evolving super fast.
It is arguably the most vibrant, alive, and evolving form of French spoken in the world today.
But all of this uncontrollable global diversity creates massive anxiety back in the halls of the Académie Française in Paris, doesn't it?
Oh, they are terrified.
Especially when you add the modern tension of English creeping in through the internet, global tech, and pop culture.
The Académie Française and traditional French institutions experience intense existential anxiety about linguistic purity.
Because they can't control it anymore.
Right. They see English encroaching on the vocabulary of business, media, and technology, and they actively, desperately try to police the borders of the language.
How do they even do that?
They issue official, mandatory French equivalents for English tech terms, like demanding people say courriel instead of email, trying to hold the line against globalization.
It's like they are standing on the castle walls in their tailored suits, trying to guard the gates, completely ignoring the fact that the internet is already tunneled underneath the moat.
That's a perfect analogy.
Well, you end up with a language suffering from a split personality.
You essentially have two distinct languages operating under one name. You have the official French.
The strict one?
This is the language of diplomacy, of the academy, of standardized exams and state essays. It is heavily policed, highly structured, and looks backward for its authority.
Okay. And the other one?
And then you have the living French.
The living French, the fast, hyper-compressed internet slang, the youth vernacular in the Paris suburbs that borrows heavily from Arabic and Romani.
Yeah.
It's code switching, it's TikTok memes, it's a deliberate, joyful rebellion against those exact prestige norms the Academy is trying to protect. Are these global and youth speakers basically hacking the official French system from the inside?
Hacking is an excellent way to describe it. The paradox here runs incredibly deep.
How so?
Standardizing the language originally, centuries ago, was an act of violence against regional identities. It was designed to erase them.
Right, the king's wiping out the other dialects.
Yet those very regions, along with the global post-colonial diaspora, are now actively reinventing the language. They are reclaiming it through remix, slang, and resistance.
It's coming full circle.
The French language carries both immense, undeniable glamour and deep, unresolved historical injury. It signifies colonial exclusion and empire, but simultaneously it provides a medium for global mobility and profound philosophical refinement.
It's a language haunted by the ghosts of its own power.
Beautifully said.
To truly see the shape of the water we're swimming in, to fully grasp the invisible structures of French we've been talking about, we need to compare it directly against its closest neighbors.
We need to see what it isn't.
Exactly. If we contrast it with English, as we've touched on, the core difference lies in deeply held cultural values regarding communication.
Contemporary English values momentum, speed, and functional directness.
We want to get to the point.
It constantly wants to get to the point. The English storytelling style implicitly says, here is what happened, let's move forward.
Just give me the bullet points so I can get back to work.
But French values reflection, scene setting, and deliberate rhetorical shaping.
It takes its time.
The French storytelling style implicitly says, wait, before we discuss what happened, here's the intellectual framework for how the event should be understood. It builds a position. It meticulously defines its terms before acting.
English is a highly pragmatic, fast-moving vehicle. It's a pickup truck. It gets the furniture moved from point A to point B with no fuss. French is a perfectly arranged, immaculately lit room where everyone is dressed impeccably and the conversation is a high-stakes fencing match.
I love that contrast.
But the really mind-blowing comparison in the sources, the one that clarifies everything, is French versus Italian, because they are literal sibling languages.
They are direct cousins, both descended directly from the vulgar Latin of the Roman Empire.
Right, they share the same roots.
They share a massive amount of base vocabulary and structural grammar, but they split dramatically, and they sound and feel entirely different today because of how political power operated in their respective territories over the last 1,000 years.
Remind us of the exact nature of that split. French centralized all its power around Paris, the absolute monarchy, and strict top-down state control.
French history dictates that the political center defines the language. The state tells you how to speak.
Okay, and Italy.
Italy remained politically fragmented for centuries. It was a chaotic, vibrant patchwork of independent city-states, maritime republics, and regional kingdoms.
No single king.
Exactly. There was no single, early, dominant Italian state enforcing one spoken norm with an army. Standard Italian eventually based itself on the literary prestige of Florence, thanks to writers like Dante and Boccaccio, but the immense chaotic regional vitality remained intact.
So Italian essentially says the language rises upward from a brilliant poem, but the local street keeps its own voice and its own authority.
That's exactly how it works.
How does that political difference change the actual physical feel of speaking them?
French syntax, as we discussed, is rigid, architectural, and obligatorily explicit. You must use your pronouns, you must use your articles.
And Italian.
Italian is far more flexible and forgiving. Because Italian verb endings are incredibly complex and clearly mark exactly who is speaking, Italian routinely drops the subject pronouns entirely.
Just drops them.
Yeah. You don't have to say I think, you just say the verb for think penso.
So Italian is literally shedding the heavy structural weight that French forces you to carry around.
It sheds the weight and it opens the mouth.
What do you mean by that?
Phonetically, French sounds veiled, gliding, and elegant. It is spoken largely in the front of the mouth, keeping the lips slightly closed, maintaining a physical boundary.
Like it's holding back.
Right. Italian sounds bright, open, and physically voiced from the chest. It uses massive, clear vowels and strong, percussive double consonants. It physically projects outward into the public square.
If French is veiled, controlled, and guarded, and Italian is open, bright, and projecting, how does that affect the actual art and culture they produce?
A language dictates what a culture naturally rewards. French rewards conceptual distinction, extreme polish, and meticulous social calibration, which naturally produces world-class philosophy, high-stakes diplomacy, and dense critical theory.
And Italian.
Italian rewards expressive physical movement, vocal energy, and emotional immediacy, which produces sweeping opera, lyric poetry, and incredibly animated regional theater.
You can even see it when they sit down to eat. The sources make this amazing poetic point. French food language emphasizes the technique of the chef. It's gastronomy, it's the rigid sequence of courses, it's the pursuit of Michelin stars and codified, replicable perfection.
Yes.
But Italian food language emphasizes the raw ingredients.
Italian culinary language focuses entirely on locality, strict seasonality, and family continuity. It is about taking a perfectly ripe local tomato and elevating it through simplicity.
It's completely different.
French turns cuisine into an intellectual discourse on method. Italian turns cuisine into a passionate expression of memory and place.
The hierarchy in French is structural, institutional, and top-down. The hierarchy in Italian is situational, relational, and based on family. I'm looking at this one line from the notes that synthesizes this beautifully. It's just pure poetry. French refines power, Italian resonates life.
That captures the historical divergence perfectly. French culture often operates as the refinement and aestheticization of power, whereas Italian culture operates as the chaotic animation of life. French is the language of the velvet-lined salon and the international treaty. Italian is the language of the sunlit piazza and the painted chapel.
What an incredible journey. What we've uncovered from this massive stack of sources is that French is not just a collection of vocabulary words you memorize from a textbook.
No, not at all.
It is a civilizational project. It was actively, deliberately cultivated by a culture that fundamentally believed language should serve as a mirror, reflecting intelligence, refinement, and strict social order.
The core insight to take away is that French is a language where thought literally becomes style. Not style as mere surface decoration, but style as a fundamental, unavoidable way of structuring your reality.
You can't escape it.
It is a language that forces its speakers to visibly, constantly map out social hierarchy, calculate intimacy, and declare their status in every single sentence they construct.
Which brings me back to the thought we opened with. We ask you to imagine a world where your grammar forces you to constantly curate your emotional distance and police your social status.
Right.
For millions of French speakers, that isn't a thought experiment. That is just how they order a coffee on a Tuesday morning. But we are all blind to the water we swim in.
It invites a profound reflection on the mechanics of our own communication, doesn't it?
It really does. What invisible social choreographies, what hidden historical hierarchies or unspoken rules of engagement is your native grammar forcing you to participate in every single time you open your mouth?
Are you subtly asserting dominance without realizing it? Are you hiding behind the passive voice to avoid taking responsibility?
Are you stacking nouns and skipping adjectives because your culture secretly values brutal industrial efficiency over the poetry of a moment? There is always a deeper architecture beneath the surface of the words we take for granted every single day.
So true.
Thank you so much for joining us on this custom deep dive. Keep questioning the words you use because they are undeniably shaping the reality you live in.